Question 35. Should we love everyone? Because remember, in question 33, we said to love the Lord your God with all our heart and to love others as ourselves. So now it leads to the question, well, should we love everyone? Yes. And we should also have a special love for believers. So should we love everyone? Yes. Let's look at Matthew 5, 43 to 45. So how are we to treat our enemies? You got proper busted there, man. Pray for them.
Love them.
Love them, yeah. So should we love everyone? Yes. And why do you think that's put in there in the Urban Catechism?
Because we only love those who love us.
Yeah, we just love people who love us. And we feel that if someone's wronged us, we got every right to hate them, yeah? Okay. Should we love everyone? Yes. And we should also have a special love for believers. So let's look at Galatians 6:10. Okay, so who are we to especially do good to? Believers, right? So should we love everyone? Yes. And we should also have a special love for believers. And now let's look at 1 John 4, 20 to 21. Can we say we love God if we do not love Christians? No. I wonder how many of us in this room have done that. You know? Sometimes you hear Christians saying, oh, I love God, but it's just Christians I can't stand. And the Bible actually says, no, that's wrong. You don't love God. Interestingly, some Christians say, you know, non-Christians, they don't have a problem with God, they just have a problem with Christians. But again, this verse would show, no, that's not true. They have a problem with Christians and they have a problem with God.
Is it referring to brothers and sisters in the faith? Is that what this verse is referring to? Or brother and sister as in, you know, your fellow man?
Yeah, I believe it's talking about brothers or sisters in Christ.
I don't think that means you can hate your brother. Physical brother.
We're not based on Matthew, the scripture we read earlier. So we'll look at
So, you got a picture here of a dad and his kids. If you say you love someone, but they got children, and you just hate their children, and you disrespect their children, you know, you just got no love for them, can you really honestly say you love their dad? Only if when you define love, you mean it in a kind of selfish, I like this person a lot, they make me feel warm inside type thing. But if you actually really love someone, you will respect their children. You won't disrespect their children. And the same way with God, we can't say we love God, but then be disrespecting his children. That would show that we don't really love God.
Would you say that it's true for the unbeliever who doesn't understand the sense of there are those who profess but are not genuinely God's, that they would look at them as being Christians and say, those are bad breed children and I don't like them? Like you say, can somebody hate the kids and love the parent, love the dad? If the kids are like rude, offensive, violent, you can not like the kids and still love the parent. But in terms of an analogy, we would say that those are obviously not children of God.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. They wouldn't be genuine children of God.
For the non-Christian, they would look at them and say, well, they call themselves a Christian, look at them. You know what I mean?
I think, though, even if one of God's children is acting badly, if we love God, we would have a certain love for that person even though they're acting badly. Because we would know they're one of God's children. So if you love someone and their son comes to you and their son is a bad person but they badly need help one night, out of love for the dad, you might say, I will help you tonight, even though you're a bad person. And I think with God, even when we see other people in the church acting wrong, we know because they're God's children, out of love for God, we should love them sacrificially. So when I'm saying love here, I'm not talking about the emotion love, but I'm talking about the command to love, where you treat people as you'd want to be treated yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'll just responding to your point about non-Christians, because I think obviously their understanding can be off, you know what I mean, in terms of what a Christian really is. So just to say that a non-Christian can say, I don't have a problem with God, I've just got a problem with Christians. If it's their perception of Christians, isn't it? Like, they'll say, oh, that priest who abused me when I was in Catholic school or whatever. As far as their understanding, that's a Christian. You know what I mean? So for us as Christians, we can be held to this, but I just wonder to what extent can we hold non-Christians to this, in view of the fact that it doesn't directly address them and their sin has warped their perception of what a genuine Christian is.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say there's two things there. One is that I would say if this is how it is for the Christians, then it doesn't mean that for non-Christians they're let off the hook. Do you know what I mean? Like, if Christians can't say they love God when they don't love other Christians, then a non-Christian definitely can't say they love God when they don't love other Christians. The second issue is that there's some people out there that non-Christians think are Christians that aren't really Christians. And so I see that as a valid point. But there still remains the question, well, do you love genuine Christians? Or I'd even take it further and say, do you love any people? Because I think the Bible implies that when you don't love people, you're not loving God, because people are made in God's image, which is why it's wrong to hurt people because they're made in God's image. But I see what you're saying. I certainly wouldn't want to downplay when someone says Christians have been bad examples, and there's a lot of fake Christians out there. I wouldn't want to downplay that and just say, well, you don't love God type thing. But I think I've maybe seen a lot of the opposite, where people say, listen, guys, you've got to understand, the problem with non-Christians, it's not God, it's you lot. And I just don't think the Bible emphasizes it that way. But I totally get what you're saying.
I've heard preachers, I think I might have done something myself, where they go into the 5 different types of love and
Yeah.
stuff. I don't know Greek. I don't know what word is used here for love.
Okay, so with love, I wondered if this was going to come up about love. I'm not going to go into 5 different types of love, but a lot of you are aware that you've heard people talk about agape love and phileo love. Basically, I'm going to say there's a difference, and then I'm going to say there's not a difference. Okay? Agape love, boy, I would really need to look at my notes to remind myself of this. But basically, some people like to make a big deal when they say agape love is always unconditional love, whereas phileo love is not unconditional love. The problem is, if you look up every instance of the verb agapao or phileo in the Greek, you find that it doesn't work that way. And you also find that when Jesus talks about his love, it's not always called agapao love. Sometimes it's the verb phileo. So the distinction doesn't always work as neatly as people like to make out. However, there is a bit of a distinction in that the verb phileo can be used when there's a reciprocal love going on, where you would love someone and there would be an enjoyment in that love. And I think agapao will often be used in the command to love. But I'm doing this from memory and not from notes. It was quite a few years ago that I did a real intense study of these verbs because I wanted to get to the bottom of it. In John 20 or 21, where Jesus says to Peter, do you love me? And he uses phileo and agapao. I think that's just for stylistic reasons. That sometimes, because John's gospel does that all the time. We use one Greek word and then a bit later use a synonym, another Greek word that means the same thing, and go back and forth. And I think exegetically that holds up with what's going on with Peter. And 2, just in terms of how the word's used. If you want to look it up more, because I'm doing this all from memory, I might be saying some wrong stuff that I'm getting mixed up. Don Carson's written a book called The Difficult Doctrine of Love. Banging book. And in that he talks about God's love. He talks about how God has a different kind of love for his people, but he also has a love for everyone in the world. And I believe there that it would also talk about that whole thing. Don Carson doesn't think that there's this special magical agapao love and a phileo love. And one of the examples he uses is, who's the bloke who rapes Tamar? Or is it Tamar who rapes his sister? David's son. Amnon. So I believe Don Carson uses one of the examples. I think this is in his devotional as well, maybe, for the love of God. That when it says Amnon loved his sister, well, in the Greek, do you know what? Let me look it up, because I really don't like doing things by memory, because then I start saying stuff that's crazy, and it's like... who can tell me where the story is of Amnon's rape of Tamar?
2 Samuel 16.
Okay, whilst I'm looking for it, I think the Bible often talks about love as a command, an action that you do, but I don't think the Bible talks about that at the expense of there doing any emotion. So our culture emphasizes the emotional aspect of love. You feel warm inside. The Bible emphasizes the command, love sacrificially for other people. But I don't think the Bible does that at the exclusion of emotion. It's not saying have a cold, heartless love for people. Sorry, what's the reference? 2 Samuel 13. Okay, so verse 1, he fell in love with his sister. Here we go, yeah. So it says, it's the verb, in the Greek Septuagint, it's the verb agapao. So if you're to say that the verb agapao, which we say as agape love, is always unconditional love, this kind of pure love we get from God, well, then we're saying that Amnon had unconditional love for his sister and he raped her. That doesn't make sense. In fact, it doesn't sound like an unconditional love, because what happens once he rapes her? Yeah, he doesn't like her anymore after that. Does it say he hates her? Okay, what verse? I mean, I believe you, but what verse is that? Oh, 15. Then Amnon hated her with intense hatred. In fact, he hated her more than he ever loved her. Yeah, thanks. So that would be an example of where you can't just say if there's the verb agapao, it means unconditional love. Now, that doesn't mean that where you see the verb agapao, it doesn't mean unconditional love. But you just can't say because this is the verb agapao, it means unconditional love. Now, there's times, I'm sure, but I'm doing this from memory, I'm sure there's times where it says that Jesus loves the Father and the verb is phileo. So we're not going to say, Jesus didn't unconditionally love his Father. So I think there's a bit of myth about the difference between those two words. But is there unconditional love that God gives his people? Yes, I think there is. So, yeah.
It's interesting to say about the emotion and the doing. They're not separated in the words. It's not separate words out there. Our culture really emphasises emotion, doesn't it?
Okay. I think I talk about this in the Greek for the Street series somewhere. I'm pretty sure I talk about it. So if you want to know something where with a bit more information in it, I think in the Greek for the Street series it talks about it. But Don Carson's book, The Difficult Doctrine of the Love of God, is a worthwhile read. It is a very good book. It's not too long either.
It's available free.
Is it?
There's a site where you can get Don Carson PDFs of his books free. Okay. Like a legitimate site.
Okay, yeah. I'll say we might have to edit that out of the table. Ephraim's Dodgy Backhanders. Underthetablebooks.com. Okay, so get that link off Ephraim afterwards, because that sounds good. Okay, what question are we on? 35? Okay, so here are the questions. How do you treat your enemies? Do you tend to love people based on what they do or on who they are? Now, maybe this question needs explanation. Some of us tend to love people based on what they do. So we have an unwritten checklist in our mind of all things people should do. Some of us think people should be on time. Well, let's start with that one. So some of us, that obviously struck a chord. Some of us feel people should be on time. If someone turns up on time, then we're like, this is one of the good ones. If someone turns up late, we're like, they're one of those people. Now, I like people to be clean in my house. I don't care if they're dirty outside my house, but in my house, I want people to wash their hands after they've been to the toilet and everything, nice and clean. And I want people, when it's cold, to shut the door. Like when you come in my house, there's a second door, and I want that shut so the draft don't come in. Well, a while back, I think it was a year ago or something, we had a guy come and visit who was thinking about becoming an intern. He was moving to Roehampton and becoming an intern. And he came in the house, and he shut the door, and I think maybe got some hand sanitizer or something. And he said something like, I like to be clean. And it was funny because Jazz turned to me and said, maybe he's the one. It was like, this guy, he reached all my criteria, and he said to me something like, I'm a bit OCD about it. I'm like, nothing wrong with that, mate, nothing wrong at all. So he, because of the things he does, I then find myself liking him, thinking this is a good guy, Some of us, we find if people don't do the things that we want them to do, then we find we don't like them. Now, the Bible would teach, because people are made in the image of God, you should love them. They're made in the image of God, so love them. God causes his sun to rise on the righteous and the wicked. So in the same way, we should imitate God. You had a point.
I was just going to say off the back of that, I think it's important to maybe note that the distinction between loving someone and liking someone. I think you can love somebody without necessarily liking them. I think, like you would just said, you liked the guy based on what he did, and that's more of the emotion, whereas the love is the command. So there might be people who, even by man's standards, are wicked. We still have to love them. We're still commanded to love them, but we don't have to like them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's helpful. And I'd like to add to that the more we get to see that people are made in God's image, the more we will be able to like people that we're loving but not liking. Do you see what I mean? So, for example, I see all over London, shopkeepers get a lot of dislike, and I'm talking about mainly Pakistani shopkeepers, Indian shopkeepers. Let's face it, the way they get talked to in London is pretty atrocious, right? Now, some people might say, well, I'm going to try loving my shopkeeper. But every time they see their shopkeeper, they just see someone of a different ethnicity, someone they don't trust, and they're thinking, maybe he's a Muslim who wants to take over this country, And they're thinking, maybe he gets the milk and changes the date on it, and the ham and changes the date on that and all these things. If that person might say, well, I'm going to try and love them anyway, they're going to have a real battle doing that. But if that person starts saying, do you know what, this shopkeeper's made in the image of God. When I walk in the shop, I'm going to look at him and say, they are made in the image of God, to reflect God. There's something about them that reflects God, even if they're not a believer. And then that person will find that they start to like the shopkeeper more, because now they've found things they can like the shopkeeper about. Do you see what I mean? So I agree with you in that there might be people that we don't like, but we should still love them. And what I'd want to do as well is then strive to start liking them because they are made in the image of God. Does that make sense?
Isn't that wrong?
How do you mean?
If the Bible doesn't just separate the emotion from the action, then why can we say it's okay not to like them? Can't we say that's more like, as no more like to be our indwelling sin? I can see you can hate sin, and that's okay to hate sin, isn't it? We can see that's evil, and that could maybe affect the way you relate to someone. But I find if you say I don't like them, and it's something that I personally, I just take a distaste to them for some particular reason, and then if I'm saying, oh, right, I can not like them, but I can love them, that's saying like, well, this person in my church, I don't like them, but I'll do my duty and I'll show everyone else that I'm loving them and do the right behaviour around them because I'm meant to do that.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. There are two things there. One, I don't know if actually, I think you made the point off the back of what I said, but I don't know if I was saying the Bible, I don't know if I was making a big point of the Bible doesn't separate emotions from the action. Yeah, I think the Bible emphasizes that love is characterized by obedience to God, and love is an action where we sacrificially give up of ourselves for other people. But what I was saying is that doesn't mean there shouldn't be any emotion involved. So some people say, look, the Bible just talks about it being an action, there's no emotions involved. I don't think that's actually true. So I think if we said we're going to love people but be heartless about it and stone cold, and we say, well, it's still love, I'd want to question that. I think there is an element of emotion there. But right now I can't, off the top of my head, think of biblical justification for that. But I think I agree with you. I think I agree with what you're both saying. I think for me, step one, if I find there's someone I don't like, step one is I've got to start loving this person whether I like them or not. And then step two is, why don't I like them? Like, if I know how much mercy God's given me, what's going on that I will not like this person? Why am I being so judgmental about the things they do? Why can't I just like them because they're made in God's image? Why can't I just like them because God's shown mercy to me? And so then I want to work on that. So I think what you're both saying is compatible with one another.
I'll be careful as well saying I know it is true that you don't have to like them, but we should love them. But in our culture, working class culture, like and love is very linked. So if I said to someone I don't like someone but I have to love them, I wouldn't love them. Do you get what I mean? So I wouldn't want to use that. And I'm not saying it's not true, but I think for our cultural context to disciple people saying that, I don't think it's wise. It's because when you don't like someone, you don't like them. And it would be hard for us to love them. But if you look at them in the image of God, then I just don't think it's wise to use that term in our culture, but I don't know.
Okay, yeah, I totally hear what you're saying. I mean, I'm agreeing with what everyone's saying at the moment. It does say in Psalm 139 or 140, let me look it up, I hate those who hate you, Lord, something like that. I was reading it just the other day. Psalm... No, maybe it's 139. Is it? Yeah. Psalm 139, verse 21. Do I not hate those who hate you, Lord? I have nothing but hatred for them. I count them my enemies. So there is a place for saying this person is very evil and wicked. They're so against God that there's a disgust I have to them. So it gets very tricky. So maybe that's why when Don Carson wrote his book about God's love, he called it The Difficult Doctrine of God's Love. And there should be a sequel called The Difficult Doctrine of Christian Love. But Ash is going to help us out now.
All I was going to say is like seems to be something that's very personal to you. So it's a matter of taste, where love is a responsibility. Do you get what? So you can like something. Because I'm ashamed to say my mum said that to me when I was young. Like, I don't like you, but I love you. Do you know what I mean? So, in other words, I don't know what you're doing, I don't know the way you're acting, but you're my son, so I still love you. And my responsibility as a mother to you will be fulfilled because I love you. So I just think, in that kind of context.
Yeah, that's very helpful. So, I think what we're seeing here is that when we talk about liking someone, it can be, at first glance, it's not always obvious what the person means. So if you're into hip hop, there's a sense in which you will like a lot of other people who are into hip hop because they like the same kind of music as you. If you're into sports, you will tend to gravitate around people who like sports. Now, there might be a case where you really love someone, like you might love your child, but your child is living such a wayward life that right now you don't find them very likable when you don't gravitate to them and don't want to hang out with them and chill out, but yet you still love them. So I think what we're seeing here is that just the term like is very hard without a context around it to know exactly what we mean. Like that painful story you just said of your mum, it's kind of easier to know what she meant then. And that I think the way we were discussing it a minute ago was quite vague, so it's kind of hard to know. Do any of the pastors ever want to weigh in on this? Any thoughts on this?
You know what? 2 weeks ago, Ben preached love is not mechanical, and I think he drew out a really great point because he said so often as Christians we can just look at it as though we're just obliged to love, and that really feelings or no feelings. But true love desires to see the other person's best and delights to see the other person's the best. So there will always be a sense, and if we're truly loving someone in the way that God calls us to love, we'll be delighted at their delight. You know what I mean? And so there will be emotion that accompanies that even if we don't like them, if they do well, we will be delighted for them. If we don't like the things about what they're doing because it's destructive to their life and to other people. And so it's not, feelings don't dictate, but when it's not void of feelings, even if we don't like the person.
This has a lot of implications for talking about ethnicity and culture, but we haven't got time to go there right now. But probably we can all work on both loving people more and liking people more, because maybe when we're not liking people, it's a sign of something going on in our own heart, maybe. Okay. So yeah, do you tend to love people based on what they do or on who they are? And the great answer is no, I love people because who they are, because they're made in God's image. But for a lot of us, the answer is going to be, do you know what? I actually have a checklist in my head that I've never thought of before. And if people don't fulfill that checklist, I get kind of annoyed. Next question. Do you grumble about people? Now, I'm sure none of you ever grumble about people, but I know that in our church and in every church I've been in, grumbling is a big problem. And I know that in council estate culture, grumbling is just standard. That most of the people you get to meet in Roehampton is from grumbling somewhere in public at the bus stop or somewhere, and you've made an immediate friend. Next question. In what ways do you personally show love for the church? What other ways could you personally show love? Can you remember why we put personally in there? I remember us changing it. It used to just say, in what ways do you show love for the church? And we put personally in there because we were getting whack answers.
Like, they'd say really vague stuff they'd just say how...
They make a long list, would they?
No, it would, rather than saying, I'm going to do this week, it would be like, we could do, and then it's just really general and vague.
That's it, they make it vague. So they'd say, well, we can be more patient with one another. That kind of stuff.
Yeah, and also people would switch it back onto other people in the church.
How other people should start doing this.
I remember one person saying to me, if they did this, then I'd be able to do this.
Right, okay.
That's why we changed it,
Yeah.
people were looking at others instead of
Yeah.
It's like they took as in you as in one, how could one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rather than how could one.
It's funny, I heard someone recently on a MP3 I was listening to say something like they were kind of getting agitated, and they were basically, if I paraphrase them, they were getting angry and saying, people in this church don't show mercy. There's no mercy here. It was just kind of funny hearing someone say that in that tone. So then it says, what other ways could you personally show love? So what we're saying there is, what way could you show love? What way could you show love? Don't tell us how everyone else in the church can show love. What about you? And then the next question is, what about this week? So you can see, this started off with one question, I think, and it grew. Because it's so hard getting someone to say, this week, I'm going to do this for so-and-so. Instead, what happened is people say, well, I think we could all be more patient. you know, and then you go away and nothing happens. So we're really trying to zero down to what can you personally actually do this week. And there's a video to watch there. It's called Saul Syndrome, which is code for victim mentality. But I started disguising victim mentality talks under other names, because no one with victim mentality wants to hear about victim mentality. Yeah, so earlier someone said, "Oh, Duncan, was that your victim mentality?" Straight away, I'm like, "No, ask my mum." You know, it's like then we get two of us. So you got to disguise victim mentality sometimes under other titles, and here I've called it Saul Syndrome.
Can I? Oh.
Let's go Adam first.
I'm going to point out that that video you just mentioned isn't written in here. You know, like normally it says.
What number have you got, Adam? On the front, what version?
86.
Oh, yeah. If you're an 86er, you haven't got it, sorry. Because it hadn't been, the video hadn't been made then. But if you've got 87, I think, or 88 and higher, and 89, yep, then you've got Saul Syndrome written in there. So if you haven't got it, just write it down there. Video to watch, Saul Syndrome. It will be on the website. Ephraim. What's that?
What do we have to do to become an 88er?
To become a what? An 88er. You start catechizing someone else, and then you need a new catechism. Ephraim.
I'm going to be in 144,000. Can you still keep the victim mentality series as victim mentality series as well as disguising it as other names?
It's still going to be on the internet, the victim mentality series, but it is going to be retaught and hopefully improved and put in higher definition as well.
That series is a banging series.
Cool. Okay, so if you turn to the person next to you, go through these questions and then pray together.